Genesis 6 and the book of First Enoch that was written centuries later after Genesis 6. What happened? Where did the devil come from? The Bible has some odd stories in it. Things like Melchizedek, king of Salem. Where did this guy come from? He just appeared one time and then he was gone. And Abraham gave him gifts or tithe or sacrifice. Elijah was taken up in a whirlwind. Same thing happened. Well, Enoch in Genesis it says God took him and he was no more. And people have wondered about these things for centuries. They may have originally been written before the 500s BC. So let's say First Temple period, or maybe even before that. But let's just say before the 500 BC. These stories were written. And then after Babylonian captivity, Persian Empire, then later the Greek and the Roman Empire, for centuries people looked back and they wondered about these stories. And so some people got together, either one author or a group of people got together and greatly expanded stories like Enoch. I mean, very little is even said about Enoch in Genesis. And so somewhere around the 200s or 300s BC, the Book of the Watchers, Book of First Enoch, and by the way, there was a book of Second Enoch, Third Enoch, but let's right now just talk about First Enoch. So let's look first and get grounded in what the text says. So it is really surprising that about more than halfway through Genesis 5, and then it leads almost directly right into Genesis 6. So these are kind of placed really close together in Genesis, this interesting observation. So let's see what it says. They're listing off all these people, all these patriarchs, how long they lived, and how old they were when they had a kid, when they had their next son. And let's see what it says. They're listing off all these. Thus, all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. So Genesis 5, verse 21. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. What a number, 365. But it says years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So Enoch's story is different from all these other people in the list. But it's like everybody's curious and wants to know, what does that mean? Okay, he walked with God. Yeah, he walked faithfully. He was obedient to God. And then he was not. God took him. So people want to know, what's going on with that? A little bit similar to the Elijah story. Elijah was taken up in a whirlwind. So people wondered, were these two people, okay, these were the only two people in the Old Testament who looks like they were taken up into heaven. Did they become immortal and they're in heaven with God? The passages just don't elaborate or say anymore. That's why I think, is why some people or an individual wrote the book of First Enoch and other texts, greatly embellishing, expanding on just this vague thing. So let's look. Going down to the end of Genesis chapter 5, we get into the beginning of Genesis chapter 6. That's where we get this other just odd story. Okay, let's read through it here in the text. Chapter 6, starting verse 1. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. Then it cuts right to this. The Nephilim were also on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children with them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And those short verses have just baffled people forever, even in the BC, after the Babylonian captivity, maybe even prior to that, wondering who were these sons of men who the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took, it doesn't say they came down, it just says they took any that they chose. So that generates a whole lot of curiosity and maybe some confusion. So centuries later, someone, or a group of someones, wrote this book of First Enoch. And in First Enoch, there are lists of names of angels. We don't see that in the Hebrew Bible. There's no lists of names of angels. It's only towards the very tail end of the Hebrew Bible we even hear like Michael, the archangel, or a couple different angel names. But the book of First Enoch, you can tell even from reading the first chapters, this is a whole nother world. Somebody has really expanded on these ideas. Was this an influence from Zoroastrianism or Persian? There's a whole lot of dualism going on, because in the Hebrew Bible, we never see angels like making independent decisions, or can they even rebel at all? Are they even able to rebel? We never see that. It's not in the Old Testament, except for this real odd passage, which I guess you'd have to read into it. But First Enoch is where we see all these lists of angels, and there's one who's their leader. He's not called Satan or the devil or anything like that. He has a different name, completely different name. Starts with an S or something like that. But anyways, so he leads the charge, and they decide they want to rebel, go down to the earth, and so they are punished and held in chains. And the story is so remarkably, he's not called the devil. But when you get to later, much later chapters, even to Second Enoch, which is so rarely known outside the scholarly world, there is a name change where it's like Santanali, something like that. So it's kind of getting closer to that name of like Satan. So it morphs over time, like develops over time. It wasn't originally thought to be Satan in the book of First Enoch. But First Enoch had a huge influence on Christianity. All this dualism where angels actually can rebel. You get the whole development of the Satan fear, which is Satan is in the Old Testament, but he's like under God's orders. He attends heavenly council meetings, like in the book of Job, first chapter. But he never acts outside of what God tells him to do. But when let's say you skip the whole gap years, like you just skip over all the apocryphal books, because, a lot of people don't even know the apocryphal books. But of course, people who are interested do know the apocryphal books. But if you were to skip over all of those and jump right into the New Testament, you would go, whoa, what's happening? You know, casting out demons and the devil. Satan is this arch enemy of God and prince of this world, all this stuff. There's this dualistic and cosmic, you know, like war between Satan and his angels and God. But one of the really concrete ways we can see that the direct connection that that First Enoch did have an impact on the New Testament, aside from just all the concepts in the dualism, is there something we see concrete even on top of all of that? Well, if you look at the New Testament book of Jude, very short, one chapter only, verse 14, we can read, it says, "It was also about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying," this is the important part, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to convict all the ungodly of their deeds of ungodliness they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him." And that is just about a direct quote right out of First Enoch. If you read just the introductory chapter of First Enoch, that is a direct quote from the book of First Enoch. Why would that be in the New Testament? Well, we usually never even hear anything about this book of First Enoch, but it had an impact on Christianity and on late Second Temple Judaism. But Second Temple Judaism ended up basically rejecting it and not including First Enoch.